While I'm waiting for my turn to cover the Photon by Canon Keys, I figured that I'd release some of my older content that I never actually released publicly, just because I kinda wanna have one video every 1 to 2 weeks, which is what this video is. Too long, didn't watch of why I love large boards. It's an easy transition to mechanical or custom keyboards from outside of the hobby. It's a great way to get people into the hobby. For the most part, a full-size layout has you covered for almost every scenario that you need a keyboard for. Bigger boards are not as common as other layouts, so they tend to garner more attention when they're released. Full-size layouts influence cool projects, and I'd love to continue to see more $200 to $350 offerings in the hobby. Okay, you got me. The Long Boy from Jack, aka Piketty, which is this board on the screen right now, is not technically a full size, but in terms of sheer size, it definitely would classify as one. Many of us started our typing journeys on a full-size keyboard. Personally, I remember taking accelerated reader tests on a computer with a full-size keyboard when I was in kindergarten. As I grew up, I was fortunate enough to have experienced middle school and high school with those colorful iMacs as well. My dad was also a software engineer, so when I was at home, I was also around computers and full-size keyboards as well, playing those Arthur or Tonka computer games, or my favorite computer game growing up, Disney Kitchen. I never thought much about the keyboards themselves growing up, and until I became an adult, I didn't even know that there were other layouts besides a full-size layout. And when I first started working the office jobs and finance jobs that I had, I also used full-size keyboards on a daily basis. But that's enough of a nostalgia trip for me in this video. The real reason I bring all this up is because, for the most part, we've been using full sizes even without thinking about it. Whether it was during school or during work, at some point we were introduced to the layout that the majority of keyboards in the world use, a full size. For some of us, when we got into the keyboard hobby, we tried to find a full-size keyboard as well to start off with, because that's what we were used to. But for the rest of us, we ended up going after other layouts from TKLs all the way down to 40%. However, if you're like me, things come full circle. Maybe it's a nostalgia thing. Maybe it's a work or school related reason to want to have a full size. Or maybe it's a little of both. No matter the reason, we still love full-size keyboards, and in this day and age, it seems like there's been a resurgence with full-size customs being released more frequently than in years past. Before we visit or revisit why I love full-size or large boards in general, let's quickly touch on the disclaimer portion of this video, which is much shorter than my review video disclaimer sections. I'll keep this short and sweet. These are my opinions and my preferences, and it's totally fine if you disagree with me or don't like the same things that I like. We all don't have to love the same things, and that's what makes this hobby great. Please also know that I don't get any sort of kickback or make any money off of any specific boards, designers, keycaps, or any items in general that I bring up in this video. No one's paid me to talk about these items, no one's told me what to say, and these are my honest thoughts. I also don't have any sort of referral codes or get paid any sort of commission if you buy any of the items that I talk about. This isn't a review, guide, or an informative video, and it's 100% just personal preferences and opinions, so feel free to chuck this video in the background when you're doing something else, and don't take anything I say seriously. This video will be similar to my 60% O-ring keyboards and why I love them video, where I simply go over why I like large boards. What is a full-size board? Full-size keyboards have a function row, F1 through F13, print screen, scroll lock, pause, a numpad area, a navigation cluster, insert home, page up, delete, and page down, an arrow keys section, and the main part of the keyboard, which are the alphas and mods. Some have 1 to 4 keys above the numpad area, such as the Keychron Q6 that I gave to my brother years ago, while others have engravings, blank space, or some type of aesthetic badge. And that's it. That's what a full size is. There are also variations that aren't exactly full sizes, such as an 1800 layout or a 96% layout, with those keyboards usually omitting some, if not all, of the nav cluster, or other changes to the traditional full size layout. There are also boards that are not full sizes due to omitting the function row, like the QFRL 100 from the Bloody Eyes that I've brought up in many other videos, or a different variation like the Muramasa from James, which was an F107 inspired layout. While these may not be classified as actual full-size layouts, they're playful takes on the layout, and some individuals may like these designs more than actual full sizes. And they're still pretty big boards. And that's the great thing about full sizes. They inspire other designs. Some designers put their own spin or tweak the standard full-size layout to meet their preferences. Maybe you don't use a function row, but need a numpad and navigation cluster. Maybe you don't use a function row or a nav cluster at all, so you may enjoy something like the Petrichor by James from Alchemist Keyboards. But make no mistake, if you see a keyboard with a function row, navigation cluster, arrow keys area, numpad, and the usual alphas and mods area of the keyboard, that's a full size. So why do I actually love full size or large keyboards? Let's move on to the first reason. My own personal mechanical keyboard journey started in 2017 with two Logitech G710 Plus keyboards that I bought. I modded both of them a few months ago, but the original ones had Cherry MX Browns and Cherry MX Blues. Yes, I love the G710 Plus so much that I bought two of them. Without jumping too deep into the rabbit hole, I basically wanted a keyboard with a macro column in order to assign macros and keys for RuneScape. Specifically, whenever I trained my construction skills, my fingers got fatigued due to having to stretch and press various keys time and time again to build items and remove items. I thought that being able to have additional keys, which this G710 Plus had, which was that column to the left, would allow me to easily train construction. In hindsight, if I had jumped into that rabbit hole and gone further into the keyboard hobby in 2017, I would have found out about QMK, and I probably wouldn't have needed a full size to play RuneScape. But we can't change the past. When I started buying or bringing in keyboards that were not full size layouts, either to work or at home, many friends and family who weren't in the hobby asked me, where are the other keys? Or told me that they couldn't imagine being able to use a keyboard that didn't have all the keys. When learning something new or joining a new hobby, it can be helpful to not feel overwhelmed if you find some common ground. Someone who's used full-size keyboards for the majority of their life may want to dip their toes into the keyboard hobby by looking at other full-size offerings, just like I did. Even if they're OEMs or pre-built gaming keyboards that aren't technically hot swappable, it's comfortable to use something that you've used before in terms of layout. This MSI gaming keyboard was what my brother used to use, and when I asked him if he wanted to try a mechanical keyboard, he said sure, under one condition. The keyboard had to be a full size. He didn't want to have multiple keyboards, so he wanted a keyboard that he could do everything with, even after I explained to him layers, macros, and so on. He also wanted something that he would feel comfortable using. He didn't want to learn a whole new layout, as changing from a membrane to an actual mechanical keyboard was a big enough switch for him. The same thing occurred with my dad, allowing me to give him a modded Keychron C2 after using membranes for decades. Going from a membrane keyboard to a mechanical keyboard with tactile switches was a big enough step for him, and I'd argue that out of all the layouts out there, those that are not in the hobby and may not ever want to be in the hobby, or those that have just started their journey with mechanical keyboards, probably feel more at home if they start with a full-size layout. Okay, so it may be easy to transition into the keyboard hobby from the outside, and a full-size layout may result in someone not having to remap any of their keys. But what's the next reason why I love full-size or large keyboards? The fact that they take up so much space. This is extremely subjective, and I say this somewhat jokingly, but the sheer size of a full size, and sometimes how much they weigh, is definitely a selling point to me when it comes to full-size keyboards. And again, I'm cheating a little here since the long boy that you see on screen right now isn't exactly a full size, since the number row and function row aren't present. But I just wanted to show you how comically large the smaller variant of the long boy was. At 29 inches or 74 centimeters, if you don't have much desk space, you probably wouldn't buy this too daily. But the fact that full-size keyboards or large keyboards inherently take up more space than other traditional layouts makes them kind of aesthetically pleasing for me. They're also slightly more ergonomic for me to use as well, as the distance between my shoulders is 24 inches or 61 centimeters. So even though I enjoy 60% boards, sometimes it isn't something I can stand for hours on end. Yes, the actual alpha and modifier sections of keyboards don't change, but especially for work where I require a numpad, it definitely feels better for me to use a longer board. And when gaming, while I tend to use WASD with my left hand and my mouse with my right, there have been gaming situations where I'm thankful that I can remap my numpad area to function as arrow keys like some numpads used to back in the day when not having numlock on, which are arrow keys. But I won't lie and say that it's mainly due to ergonomics. It may seem a bit childish, but there's just something that makes me inherently happy when I use a full-size keyboard or similar. Innuendos and jokes aside, a larger, heavier, or longer slab of aluminum or plastic, especially if it's a variation or a play on the full-size layout without being an actual full-size, not only can be more aesthetically pleasing to me, but it's just fun. Since those that aren't in the hobby will automatically be curious if a board doesn't look like your standard membrane keyboard or even an OEM, if you bring your board to work or use it among those that aren't keyboard hobbyists, it's a great conversation starter. Yes, for the most part, we only look at the top of our keyboard when typing, but there have been many a conversation that I've had thanks to the side or back design of a full-size or large keyboard. A specific color or finish, the actual weight, and so on. Especially with boards like the Longboy, QFRL 100, and Muramasa, which aren't exactly full size, but a take on the full size layout, those boards definitely aren't using a layout that many have seen before, and they obviously look different than your standard membrane keyboard. Maybe it's also the same reason why things like large statues, monuments, giant battleships, and space shuttles make me happy. There's something about being a little over the top, especially when it comes to layouts that were inspired by a full size, like the 3 boards that I just mentioned, that I enjoy. Memes aside, it's also somewhat risky to design full-size keyboards that aren't mass-produced like OEMs or large keyboards, and we see a lot of 60%, 65%, and TKL offerings. And while the market may be full of similarly designed keyboards, it's also relatively safe to design those layouts since most of them sell like hotcakes, and that's what the majority of the hobby uses in terms of layouts. But I'll get into that later in my wishes for full-size offerings in our hobby section. And let's get to my next reason why I love full-size or large keyboards, the keyboard triangle. Again, please know that these are just general opinions, and of course not every full-size or similarly designed layout will look the same, sound the same, or feel the same. So take this with a grain of salt, as there are always exceptions to the rule. Based on the full-size keyboards or similar sized keyboards that I have personally typed on, however, I did make a few generalities and why I love full-size or large keyboards when it comes to the keyboard triangle. Since you have a larger keyboard to work with in general, you have an opportunity to add some sort of unique design features to a full-size that you may not have been able to with smaller layouts, or they may not be as pronounced on smaller layouts. Does a full-size need some sort of fancy schmancy engraving or internal-external weight? No, of course not. For example, I've referenced the Keychron Q6 and C2 in this video, and neither of them have engravings or weights. If someone simply likes the classic externals of those 2 boards, I get it, that's totally fine. And sure, it'll help with costs if those full-size keyboards are plain. I'm just saying that with a larger canvas, a full size or larger, a designer has more room to play if they choose to do so. And again, before I bring up these 4 boards, I do want to let you know that this is not an advertisement for any of the 4 boards. They're just examples of what I'm talking about. The Bina 103 has an engraving on the top right of the top case, which wasn't necessarily something I loved when it came to the looks of the keyboard, but the fact that it had a cool looking through weight was something that I really liked. The Fossil from Carolina Mech also had something similar, an external weight of a fossilized dinosaur. The same goes for the Pangea, and my most recent full-size group buy purchase of the Seal, which is to give to my brother so he can swap between the Seal and the Q6. You've got an enormous back area to do something fun with in terms of a weight or engraving, which can really be a prominent talking point when it comes to full-size keyboards or similar. And yes, you're absolutely right. You can't see the bottom of your keyboard when typing for the most part, but that isn't necessarily a deal breaker for others. I mean, I can't see the back of the Migra TKL when typing, but that doesn't diminish my love of the board's aesthetics one bit. And speaking of bottoms and weights, let's move on to sound. I have more experience with aluminum full-size or similar boards, and the only plastic full-size or similar board that I've ever used are my two G710 Pluses, the Keychron C2 that I modded for my dad, the multitude of membrane and generic OEM full-sizes, and the Longboy. So I'm not an expert by any means for plastic full-size keyboards. For aluminum full-size or similar boards, however, due to the actual length and weight of those boards, when you talk about acoustics, they don't really tend to need an internal weight, let alone an external weight, to sound good for the most part. And I say good and need in quotation marks, which you obviously can't see because this is a video, as it's ultimately up to the designer and what they think looks and or sounds best. But from my experience, internal or external weights aren't needed as much as other layouts may need them. Again, this is just a general statement from testing, removing internal weights and external weights, and having boards without one of the two or none of the two. You also typically get a deeper sound signature from full-size boards as opposed to smaller boards. But obviously, we know that there are many factors when it comes to sound, so it's always going to be a combination of not only layout or size, but mounting style, case material, design choices, how many pieces there are of the case, and so on. And that's not even taking into consideration keycaps, switches, plates, typing surfaces, and so on. You can, of course, still get a loud sound from a full size. And I love my Muramasa and QFRL sound signatures. Yes, they're not full sizes, but they're similar. But due to full-size keyboards having more space in general, unless there's too much space, which can lead to a lot of reverb, and also a reason why some designers choose to include internal weights, you do get a deeper sound signature and a louder sound generally. At least that's what I experienced with my QFRL and Muramasa sound tests, which I'll link in the video description below. Until I had typed on the QFRL 100, I had thought that most full-size boards or large boards generally had a harder time implementing a softer typing feel due to either the mounting style of the board or just because of having to deal with a big PCB. But that all changed when I typed on the QFRL and how the Bloody Eyes implemented the bottom mount on that board. It was absolutely a fantastic and soft typing experience. And sure, maybe the designer will split the PCB in order to allow for a softer typing feel instead of having a one-piece PCB. For example, some boards will have a separate PCB for the numpad and separate PCB for everything else. And sure, the Keychron Q6, for example, had gasket mount, and it looks like it was flexy, but it's one thing to be able to press really hard and achieve flex or bounce, and it's another thing to be able to type normally and actually experience a soft typing feel. Besides the QFRL 100, I wouldn't have classified any full-size keyboard as having a soft typing feel that you could actually notice when typing normally. Now, I'm sure that I'm wrong since only Siths deal in absolutes, but just based on my experience in typing on full sizes, I'd say you're probably going to get a firm, yet not super soft typing feel with full sizes. And yes, you can play around with plates if a board has soft plates available, but even then it's dependent on how the mounting style is implemented and the PCB itself, if there's enough room for that flex or bounce. So for those that like a firmer typing feel or don't really need a soft typing experience, for the most part a full size is a great middle ground, and it offers a slightly firmer feeling when it comes to typing. Feel itself isn't a selling point for full sizes for me personally, because I've made do with boards that have a very stiff typing experience, and the one board that I absolutely could not use was a FlexCut 1.2mm PCB plateless JRIS Round 1 configuration. So when it comes to the keyboard triangle, feel is a very distant third behind sound and aesthetics, with aesthetics being the most important of the triangle for me when it comes to full sizes or large keyboards. Nevertheless, I wanted to mention feel since it's a part of the keyboard triangle. And again, there are exceptions like the QFRL 100 that go against the norm and offer a soft typing feel. Well, that concludes my reasons why I love full size or large keyboards. But what do I personally want for the future of our hobby when it comes to large board offerings? Allow me a few more minutes of your time and I'll explain. First of all, I am not a designer. I have never sold items to the keyboard community, and this is just my own opinion. It's not more important than any of your opinions, and this is just honestly how I feel. Someone designing a full-size keyboard will have to deal with the actual costs to make a larger layout and the best way to price it to make it appealing to us. Most of the full-size keyboards that we see require a specific MOQ to be hit, and it's typically pricier than other layouts, which absolutely does make sense given more material needed to machine those full sizes and everything else that affects cost. However, this is where something like the brand new Intro S100 can make a name for itself. Yes, Keychron, Acco, and other boards do have a good amount of market share with their sub $200 full-size offerings, and things like the Pangea and Seal are nice offerings in the $300 to $400 plus category of full sizes. But something in between a Keychron and a Pangea or Seal, like the Intro S100, especially for what it brings to the table, can be a game changer for those that may not necessarily want the cheapest full size, but also don't want to spend more than $250 or $300. The community has been clamoring for a really nice value proposition around that price point for a long time to compete with boards like the Keychron Q6. And not many took the risk to try and release a board like the Intro S100 to fit into that price range. And no, this is not an ad for the Intro, especially since the group buy has not even begun to fulfill and we don't know how the production units will be received. But I do give that board kudos for trying to fill that gap in the market. And if we've learned anything in these past 2 years when it comes to budget offerings, or keyboards that are $200-ish or below, it's that there's a huge market compared to keyboards that are upwards of $350, $400 and more. I mean, I guess it makes sense because obviously if something costs less, there will be more people that can afford it automatically. Imagine if there were more full-size aluminum offerings around $200 to $300. Yes, it doesn't hurt to have close ties and a relationship with a manufacturer like Vertex or STR, and to be able to sell many units to bring the overall pricing down and not really having to worry about MOQ. And of course, we shouldn't expect every designer to be able to offer a full size around the same price point, but I'd really love to see either designers or bigger brands come out with competitive offerings. Yes, the QK101 is a thing, and as much as aesthetics is a selling point, it could also be a reason why someone doesn't want to buy the board. The QK101 may seem a little too busy or matrix looking for some. The race to the bottom is heating up with many companies realizing that there's a lot of money to be had when it comes to lower priced offerings. And again, there are many more individuals that are able to afford a cheaper item. So hopefully, we'll be seeing more and more actual full size or equivalent boards released that can compete with the Intro S100 and the QK101. If other companies see how well either of those two sells, it'll incentivize them, hopefully, to also come out with competitive full-size offerings to take advantage of that portion of the keyboard market. First of all, sorry about reusing some of the same pictures or footage that I've used in many other videos, but it's pretty cold in Iowa with a lot of snow and ice, and I didn't feel like going outside and recording new footage, and inside of the house is not necessarily the best place to take pictures or capture footage, so I do apologize. But overall, I think it's fantastic that we're getting more full-size or similar offerings. Out of the dozens of GeekHack or Z Frontier ICs that we get posted every month, it's somewhat rare to have one or two being full sizes. I think we're going to see more and more affordable full sizes coming out, especially if the Intro S100 and QK101 sell successfully. Competition is great, especially since the full-size part of the market, especially the affordable full-size part of the market, has a lot of room for more offerings. Will we see QK's most famous competitor, Melitrix, or the Zoom series, finally come out with its full-size offering? Possibly. Will we see these newer vendors and brands stepping up to the plate? Well, we can only hope. 2025 is shaping up to be an interesting year, and who knows what's in store for us over the next 10 months. But no matter what, please remember to be financially responsible, and it's okay to just save without having a specific reason to do so. Just because I know something fun or interesting will come out in the near future, and hey, if you're thinking about introducing someone that isn't in the hobby to the hobby, especially if they're more of a standard keyboard user that uses full sizes and can't see themselves using anything other than a full size, consider introducing them to the full size offerings we have in our hobby. Or keep an eye out for affordable full size boards coming out in the future. Who knows? You may end up being the person that gets them interested in the hobby. And as I've said many times, the community is my favorite part of the hobby. And in terms of there hopefully being more full sizes or large boards in general, not just competitors in the $200 to $350 price range, I'm all for it. The market currently is not oversaturated with full sizes, and the more options there are, the better, especially if they're affordable. And hey, if you create an IC or even start a group buy and the numbers aren't there, at least you tried, and I appreciate you for trying. I hope you've enjoyed me talking about full sizes or large boards and why I like them, and how I got introduced to the hobby through them. Please let me know if you share the same thoughts, or if you also predict that we're in for a surge of affordable full sizes, or full sizes in general in our hobby by the end of 2025. Thanks for watching. I love you all, and catch you next time.